we were not just in this plain old theater. It never felt like it was a plain old play.
We were really introducing a whole new world to these people who had never met a Jew in their lives.
It's an emotional train. You ride that train every night and twice on matinee day.
It kind of changed the way that I thought about history and also the world.
I had sincerity. I wanted to play this girl that I empathized with and had been murdered by the Nazis. I wanted to play her right.
You know, it's just something that I feel like I will probably carry with me for my whole life.
After my husband passed, I went to Europe and went to see Otto Frank, and I spent some time with him and his wife. He was, I don't know who was who. Otto Frank was very much like my husband, and my husband was very much like Otto Frank.
In what sense do you mean that?
Well, in little things. I mean, that would mean nothing to anybody else but to someone like me. Just little things. We sat at the table and had lunch, and his wife had not left the proper teaspoons on the table. And he turned to her and said, "The spoons aren't here." And I thought, my God, that's something my husband would have done to me 1,000,000 times over. And it wouldn't mean anything to anybody else, but it was a characteristic of both men. They were remarkably much alike. I would say my husband became like Otto Frank.
I'm Adam Langer, the creator and host of Playing Anne Frank, a podcast from the Forward about the dramatic history of the Diary of Anne Frank. The voice you just heard was the actress and radio host Leonora Rogers Schildkraut. Leonora's late husband, Joseph Schildkraut, played the role of Otto Frank on Broadway and in the 1959 movie. She and I talked about what that role meant to him.
Oh, my heavens. It was very, very important to him how he took that role. More than I think anything else he played in his lifetime. It was something that he grasped onto. He was involved with it for over 3 years, and it took a whole part of his being. As long as I knew him, the diary was very important to him.
I'm recording this part of our podcast on a bench near the corner of 2nd Avenue and 12th Street. Across the street is the Village East Theater. It's an art house multiplex that's showing Bros, Triangle of Sadness, and Ticket to Paradise. During the heyday of the Yiddish theater in the first half of the 20th century, it was the Yiddish Art Theater. Joseph Schildkraut's dad was a star here. On the side of the street where I'm sitting, there's a Japanese restaurant. It's on the site of an old cafe where the stars of the Yiddish theater hung out with the biggest names of the time. E.E. Cummings came here. So did Charlie Chaplin. In The New Yorker, Leo Rostin wrote about the cafe. Everybody who's anybody turns up at the Cafe Royal at least one night per week. There was a Broadway play about the cafe, and in 1964, someone thought it'd be a good idea to turn it into a musical. Joseph Schildkraut was going to be the star. He played the patriarch of a Yiddish theater family dynasty. Not much of a stretch. And this would be his musical debut, and his first time on stage since The Diary of Anne Frank. That song playing is the opening number from Café Crown, a musical that opened and closed in just a few nights on Broadway in 1964. Alan Alda was in the show. So was Theodore Bickel. Not Joseph Schildkraut, though. Just before the show was going into rehearsal, Schildkraut died of a heart attack in his Manhattan apartment at the age of 68. The Diary of Anne Frank turned out to be the last show he did on Broadway, and it's the one he'll always be remembered for. In a less dramatic sense, that was true for just about everyone in the Broadway cast. This was the most important show they did. You probably haven't heard of most of them because this was pretty much their last time on Broadway. Some got married, some were inspired to pursue new careers, some just couldn't hack the actor's life. When you've already done one of the most beloved shows in the history of American theater, what do you do for an encore? Anne Frank would live on stage for decades. It still lives on today. But for the people we're going to talk to in this episode, Anne Frank was the pinnacle. This is episode 3, Moving On. In February 1957, the Diary of Anne Frank transferred from the Court Theatre to the Ambassador, where it closed in June. All in all, it had a run of 717 performances on Broadway.
And I got into the show in the spring of 1957. I had graduated college and worked a few months, and then I came to New York because I wanted to be an actress.
That's Renee Pessin. Before she got married, she was Renee Hafner. In May 1957, she took over the role of Margaret Frank on Broadway. She had graduated from Memphis State. A columnist for one of the papers there, the Memphis Press Scimitar, wrote about Renee. There's a picture of her next to another actress, and the caption says, Memphis to Broadway and Hollywood.
It's like a calling, I suppose, except I don't want to make it that sounds egotistical. But it's wanting to be an actress or actor and do a good play. That's wonderful. That's manna from heaven. And doing this play felt good.
In 1959, Renee was the subject of a huge magazine spread called Young Girl in New York. There are pictures of Renee. There she is, running down the street to a casting call, reading at an audition, strolling under the marquee of an off-Broadway theater, squeezing past Jackie Gleason at an opening party at Sardi's, cocktailing with a fashion photographer, babysitting to make ends meet. 1 month later, there's an item in the Wisconsin Jewish Chronicle announcing that she's going to be marrying a doctor named James Pessin.
I didn't do any acting after I got married.
Did you regret that at all, or was it time to go and you did a really important show?
No. I did have some feelings about it, but my husband was in medical school. He graduated medical school, and then he had to do fellowships. Well, you don't get any money, really, from doing fellowships. And then, of course, he got drafted during the Vietnam War. So for 2 years, he was in the Army, and we were stationed in Texas. That's, things happen when you move on in life, and you replace one thing for another. And my family came first, always.
You got married, you had kids. How much of your life as an actress did you share with them, or your life in Anne Frank? How much do they know about it?
Well, I don't think I shared very much of my background that way with my friends in Scarsdale. We moved there in 1970, and we left in 2000. 30 years. And I think maybe there was one or two people that knew I was in the theater way back. I never discussed it. I was a mother, a wife. I did all the normal things that mothers and wives do.
But did your sons and daughter talk to you about that, or did you
Well, my boys, no. I mean, they knew somewhere in their mind. They knew, because there was a picture of me on the wall, and, if they paid attention to it, I'm not sure.
he was an interesting director because he would let you do things, and then he would type on a card and give you a note to think about overnight. And he was wonderful. He was funny, and Susan Strasberg was a joy, and so was Eve Rubinstein. Well, they all were. His main note to me was stop crying, because I thought it was so sad. I just couldn't stop it. But he told me to stop it, and so I did, because I knew they would all die except Otto Frank.
That's Peter Dan Levin. He originated the role of Peter Van Dan. That was his Broadway debut, and, as it turned out, his only major role.
I'll tell you how my acting career was I say to everybody, it was cut short when I couldn't get a job as a waiter. And then I decided, the hell with it, I'm not going to be an actor anymore. And I called a friend who was working at WCBS. His name was Barry Frank. And I said, Barry, I need a check. He said, 2 months later, I was a PA at the WCBS, and I started it all over again. I was 30 years old, and I had to learn all about cameras and all that stuff. And so I did. And I stopped being an actor, and then I became an associate director, and then I became a director.
Mostly, Levin directed for television, episodes of Lou Grant and Cagney and Lacey, and a show called Love is a Many-Splendored Thing.
Love is a many-splendored thing has been brought to you by Libby's Canned and Frozen Foods. Something good is always cooking at Libby's.
Levin had a prolific career in Hollywood. He directed well into the 21st century, but as far as acting was concerned, Anne Frank was the high point.
I knew I was washed up. I mean, you can't get any better than that. Several people have told me that I didn't have much confidence in myself, and that may be true. When I look at all these actors now and I watch, I could never be like that. I just didn't have it.
How has Germany confronted the sins of their past?
There will be no release from this history.
And could we ever do the same?
Because if we don't, it will be too late for America.
Listen now to the podcast Memory Wars from Radio IQ, part of the NPR network.
Honestly, the first night I went on, I didn't have one nerve. When I think about it now, it's like, was I crazy or what? I mean, I just went on, no nerves or stomach upset or anything. I just went out, I did the lines. The only surprise was I got laughs, which, of course, only encouraged me. I loved telling that story. I loved being a part of that experience. And it was a great story, and it was well told, and I got to be a part of it.
That's Arnold Margolin. He played Peter Van Dan, too, and he didn't act much after Anne Frank either. In fact, he said, that's the show that made him give up acting altogether.
It definitely made me decide I did not want to be an actor.
What about it made you decide that? Why did you think that?
I just kind of got bored of, doing this and exhausted. It was 8 shows a week. And so if you were in a show, it was exhausting. And if you weren't in a show, which was probably most of the time, it was depressing. So it didn't seem like a very good future to me. I didn't have the bug,
Margolin told me he was probably one of the only actors in history who used the Army to get out of a Broadway contract.
Would that have been an option for you to go on the road with it if you wanted to?
Well, actually, I had a contractual obligation. The only way I could get out of it was to volunteer for the draft, which I did. So I knew I had to do my Army service anyway, so I went in the Army to get out of Diary of Anne Frank.
After Arnold came back from the Army, he went into television. He wrote for That Girl and The Andy Griffith Show. He did a Neil Simon movie called The Star-Spangled Girl, and he created a show that was pretty big for a while. Maybe you remember the theme song.
Were there things you took away from Anne Frank that kind of informed your career at all?
Absolutely. I learned a lot about acting, and which really informed my career as a writer. Because being able to understand what an actor is looking for in a script was key to my rise in the ranks of television motion picture writers, and to know what problems actors commonly had with material, being able to find out what the motivation was and all those actor problems. I kept that. So I certainly learned a lot about acting.
It made me think more, I think, about life and people and wonder why it's happening today, right before our eyes. You can't turn away from what we're seeing. And a lot of people, I think, in the time of Anne Frank did, though there were a lot of very good people like Meep Geese and her husband, who were part of a ring of people who were trying to save the Jews and protect them and bring them food and stuff like that, until they finally were picked up.
That's Hale Gabrielson. She's Hale Lamont Havers now. Hale played Meep Geese on Broadway, and she had connections in show business. Her father was a screenwriter who wrote for television shows like Mama and Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Yes, Postmark for Happy Eating presents Mama, the award-winning drama, starring Peggy Wood.
You'd think showbiz connections would have given Hale Gabrielson a leg up, but it didn't quite work out that way. Hale's dad abandoned her and her mom, and he wasn't good about sending alimony checks either. After she played Meep, she did a couple of off-Broadway and regional gigs, but there wasn't much in the way of acting after that.
Was it hard for you to eventually leave the theater?
I got tired of making the rounds every day and not finding work. And then I had a friend who got a job at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And she said, "Why don't you come and work with me? They're looking for people."
Hale took a job in the sales department for the Met. She worked there for 5 years. She got married, had kids. She worked in local government in Sudbury, Massachusetts. She also became an amateur criminologist and wrote historical romances and crime fiction with titles like Affinity and Madness and Obsession. Whether she was writing her books or raising her family, she still thought a lot about the show she'd done on Broadway.
We weren't doing it for tragedy. We weren't mourning anything about the past. We were just acting the way that people supposedly acted then, and we tried to get the best interpretation we could. But what more can I tell you? It made a great deal of difference to me.
And originally, I auditioned for Anne. And I auditioned in New York, and Colonel Bloomgarden came down the aisle after it with tears running down his face. But I was too tall because they already had Joseph Schildkraut as the father, and I was too tall to, pretend that I was 13 or something.
That's Eva Rubinstein. In 1956, while she was still playing Margaret Frank, she got married. And to a guy maybe you've heard of, William Sloane Coffin Jr., he became the chaplain of Yale. Eva worked for the Long Wharf Theater, raising their 3 children and trying to figure out what to do next. Meanwhile, Coffin was grabbing headlines as a peace activist, speaking out against the Vietnam War on ABC News.
We welcome the indictment because what we want to do, and hopefully we'll be able to do it, is to try to demonstrate to the country that many aspects of the war, many aspects of the draft law are really unconstitutional.
In 1968, the same year that her husband was indicted for helping people to evade the draft, the two of them divorced. But along the way, Eva found a different sort of calling.
There was a guy at the theater who had been in their children's company and then had gone off to Ireland, which is where his family had come from, and come back with photographs and had become the theater's photographer. He showed me how to load film so that I could load one camera while he was using the other one. So I started sort of assisting during the shoot. And then I went back with him to his darkroom. And then I saw, for the first time, I saw a photograph actually coming up in the developer, not like in a movie, but, you know, for real. And I remember getting literal goosebumps, which I am actually getting right now, just remembering that, because I suddenly thought, oh my God, you can do anything with this. You can go anywhere. You don't need costumes. You don't need a choreographer. You don't need a director. You don't need language. It's like music. I said, my gosh, what a fantastic thing. It was just amazing. Because everything else I'd ever done, you know, was gone in the morning. I mean, nobody saw me. None of my kids ever saw me on stage. And there's no, you know, nothing left of all the years that I did those things. But the photograph, you know, stays overnight, and it's still there.
Eva Rubinstein became a photographer. It's the job she still does today, nearly 70 years after she appeared on Broadway in Anne Frank.
Had spent 12 years of sort of reality, and make-believe just wasn't part of the deal anymore. I mean, so I decided, well, what the hell, I'm going to try for this photography stuff and see what happens. So I just started roaming around and taking pictures and trying to photograph, doing some portraits of people I had known or people I ran into, or literally picking people up off the subway and taking them back to my place and doing a portrait. And I did a sort of whole portfolio of portraits. And somebody said, you should show them to Vogue.
That's interesting that what you're saying. It's like it seems like you didn't like the ephemerality of theater, how it was there and it was gone.
I didn't think of it at the time. But it was later when I suddenly realized that there was nothing, I had nothing to show for it in a sense. You know, some yellowing reviews, which don't mean very much. But there was nothing left in the morning, you know. I'm a very good cook, but there was nothing much left of that in the morning either, you know. So.
Eva Rubinstein was talking there about her own life, why she gave up acting and turned to photography. Theater was fleeting, and she wanted to create something that would last, to preserve those moments. And the same thing was true for everyone I talked to who moved on from the theater after Anne Frank. They wanted something permanent. They started families, they directed and wrote movies and TV shows. One of them wrote books. They didn't need the theater anymore because they knew they had already been part of something that would live forever. Because even after they left, and the show closed on Broadway, the Diary of Anne Frank went on, and now it was time for Anne Frank to go on the road. What happened when it got there? That's coming up on the next episode of Playing Anne Frank. You've been listening to Playing Anne Frank. I'm Adam Langer. I'm the executive editor of The Forward. I wrote and created this podcast. It was produced and engineered by Cole Acasio. Our associate producer is Scylla Shaman. She composed the original score, which features Anat Cohen on clarinet. Playing Anne Frank is a production of The Forward. Our editor-in-chief is Jody Radoran, and our CEO is Rachel Fishman-Feddersen. Playing Anne Frank is made possible in part by funding from Canvas, the Cy Sims Foundation, and Barbara Streisand. Our consulting producers are Julianne Hausler, Doug Matica, and Jerome Kramer. Additional editing and research by Samuel Breslow, Irene Katz-Connolly, Mira Fox, PJ Grissar, Beth Harpaz, and Matt Littman. The Forward's VP of Development is Lisa Lepson. Our grants manager is Jason Mandel. Our digital innovation director is Jacqueline DeBonis. Designed by Anya Ulinich and Angeli Zaslavsky. Special thanks to Stephanie Abu, Marie Kuhlman, Elizabeth Ellis, Jay Ehrlich, Whit Lacasio, Daniel Liddell, Charlie Meyerson, Lauren Allerhead, Dahlia Shaman, Solveig Zisinich, and to Lauren Pacell of Tink Media and Talia Zaks. The Forward Association is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 1897.